Hip hop, I think for me, from a musical perspective, is poetry to the beat of music, but it started with music first. And that's why it got so much world acclaim, is because of the bands that we played. Although we used to isolate the particular section that we wanted to use, but we were using all these different genres of music.
Grandmaster Flash is turning 70 soon, and people keep asking about those scars on his neck. But here's what they don't tell you. Those marks aren't just about one bad night. They're about a kid from the South Bronx who turned pain into power and built an entire culture from broken turntables and borrowed electricity. Joseph Robert Sadler, the man you know as Grandmaster Flash, didn't just survive the roughest neighborhood in America. He invented the blueprint that changed music forever. Born on January 1st, 1958, Flash grew up when the South Bronx was literally burning. We're talking about a place so broken that people called it gang-ridden and burned out. Buildings were abandoned. Crime was everywhere. The city had cut budgets so badly that whole neighborhoods just fell apart. The Cross Bronx Expressway had ripped through communities, destroying homes and lives. This wasn't just poverty. This was structural collapse. And right in the middle of all that chaos, hip-hop was born. But Flash's childhood was even harder than most. When his mother got sick, he ended up in foster care at a place called the Greer School. Imagine being a kid, losing your family, living in an institution while your neighborhood crumbles around you. Most people would break. Flash did something different. He found focus. He found music. Even back then, he was practicing on his father's record collection, throwing on vinyl whenever his dad wasn't home. And at the Greer School, he actually DJ'd a Halloween party. While other kids were lost, Flash was building discipline. That time in foster care taught him something crucial. When life is chaos, you create your own order, you find your own structure. And for Flash, that structure was 2 turntables and a mixer. The South Bronx in the 1970s had nothing, no money for fancy music schools or proper venues. DJs hooked their sound systems up to lampposts just to get electricity for park jams. Everything was makeshift. Everything was survival. But that limitation created something beautiful. When you have nothing, you get creative. You turn consumer products into instruments. Standard turntables became laboratories. And Flash, with all that discipline from his rough childhood, became the scientist. He started by watching DJ Kool Herc, who figured out you could extend the instrumental break by using 2 copies of the same record. But Flash took that idea and perfected it into something called the quick mix theory. Picture this. He's playing the drum break on one turntable. While that's playing, he's listening in his headphones to find the exact same spot on the second record. The moment the first break ends, he cuts to the second turntable where the beat is already queued up perfectly. Then he backspins the first record to the start of the break, back and forth, endlessly looping that same few seconds of drums. The dancers went crazy. The MCs had a bed of beats that never stopped. Flash had turned the turntable into a percussion instrument. This technique wasn't just about entertainment. It was about creating a continuous foundation that allowed breakdancers to showcase their moves and MCs to develop their rhymes without interruption. The parties in the Bronx needed this because the energy had to stay constant. The crowd had to stay engaged, and Flash delivered that with mathematical precision. Every transition was calculated. Every beat was intentional. This level of technical mastery separated him from everyone else. People would come from all over just to watch him work, to see his hands move across the equipment with surgical accuracy. But perfection required perfect tools, and the equipment didn't exist yet, so Flash built it himself. He invented the slip mat, that smooth piece of material under the record that lets you scratch without messing up. The turntable speed seems simple now, but it changed everything. Before that, you couldn't manipulate records rhythmically. Flash made scratching possible. Then there was the headphone problem. He needed to hear both turntables at once to make his transitions flawless. Commercial mixers didn't have that feature. So what did Flash do? He took wires from old stereo components, spliced them together, and glued them into his mixer with crazy glue. He literally engineered his own cue system, and it worked. Now he could pre-listen to the next record and make sure every transition was seamless. Flash had a rule he called the biblical law of DJing. You must never go into the whack part, never play the boring section, never make a mistake. In the competitive environment of Bronx Park jams, one mistake could end your reputation. But for Flash, this perfectionism was about more than ego. It was about control when your life has been unstable, when you've dealt with foster care and violence and chaos. And then technical mastery becomes survival. If he could control the music perfectly, if he could make every beat land exactly right, then at least one part of his world made sense. So before we go further, think about this. Flash didn't just create techniques. He created a philosophy, focus, determination, control, turning adversity into excellence. If that resonates with you, if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to let their circumstances define them, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Tell me what challenges you've turned into strengths. Let's build that conversation now about those scars. In his youth, Flash survived a violent attack that left permanent marks on his neck. The details are scarce, but the aftermath was brutal. Post-traumatic stress disorder, flashbacks, nightmares, fear, isolation, guilt. He couldn't sleep. He pulled away from people. Those scars weren't just physical. They were psychological wounds that could have destroyed him. But Flash made a choice. He decided those scars wouldn't define him through pain. Instead, they would represent strength, self-acceptance, proof that he survived. He embraced those marks as part of his identity, transforming a constant reminder of trauma into motivation. The scars became symbols of resilience, not just for him, but for everyone from the South Bronx. That neighborhood had scars too: poverty, crime, violence. But out of that scarred landscape came hip-hop, creativity, and triumph born from struggle. Flash's neck became a living metaphor for the culture itself. And here's the thing about trauma. It creates hypervigilance, a need to control your environment because you've learned the world is unpredictable and dangerous. The psychological state maps perfectly onto Flash's technical perfectionism. Beat juggling requires absolute precision, zero tolerance for error, total control. Flash created a predictable, ordered system on his turntables to counteract the unpredictable chaos in his mind and his neighborhood. Music became his therapy, his salvation, his weapon against fear. The act of creating something perfect in an imperfect world gave him purpose. Every flawless transition was a victory over the disorder that had defined his early life. Every seamless mix was proof that he could build something beautiful despite everything trying to tear him down. This psychological connection between trauma and artistry runs deep through Flash's entire career. The same hyper-awareness that came from PTSD made him notice every tiny imperfection in his sets. The same need for control that came from chaos made him engineer solutions nobody else had thought of. The same determination that came from foster care made him practice until his technique was absolutely flawless. Meanwhile, Flash and his group, the Furious Five, were making cultural history. They carved the basic elements of hip-hop into vinyl with tracks like Freedom and The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel. But their masterpiece came in 1982. The Message. Before that song, hip-hop was party music, fun, escapism. The Message changed everything. It exposed the dirty underside of urban life. It documented the struggles and harsh realities of New York City, broken glass everywhere, people living in poverty, the constant grind of survival. Hip-hop became a weapon for social change, a way to tell the truth about communities the rest of America ignored. Flash and the Furious Five transformed the genre from entertainment into social commentary. They proved that hip-hop could be art, could be journalism, could be revolution. Their song is still powerful today because it captured something real, something painful, something true. But here's the tragedy. While Flash was creating this revolutionary art, he was getting exploited by the music industry. He admits it himself. He knew nothing about music, publishing, and royalties. His focus had been on street fame and performance mastery, not business. And that knowledge gap made him vulnerable. When you come from a marginalized community, when you build your art in parks and abandoned buildings outside the commercial system, you don't have lawyers, you don't have agents, you just have your talent, and talent alone doesn't protect you from predatory contracts. Flash started asking questions about fair compensation. Immediately, he hit resistance from label executives. The resistance told him everything. He was being underpaid, exploited. The people profiting from his genius weren't the people creating it. This realization changed his perspective. He stopped chasing street fame and started understanding music as a vehicle for wealth creation. But the damage was done. Disputes over royalties for The Message led to contract battles with Sugar Hill Records and their promoter, Sylvia Robinson. The group split. Flash sued the label. The creators of a song about economic injustice were themselves victims of economic injustice. The irony is painful, but Flash's legacy isn't defined by exploitation. It's defined by innovation, by resilience, By transformation, his technical contributions, the quick mix theory, the slip mat, the custom cue system, established the foundation for all modern DJ culture. His method of isolating and looping breaks created the blueprint for sampling, which will become the backbone of hip-hop production. What he did with vinyl in the 1970s, future producers would do with digital technology. Flash wrote the syntax of the genre. More than that, his life story matters. Growing up in a resource-scarce, high-crime environment should have destroyed him. Foster care should have broken him. A violent attack and PTSD should have ended him. Financial exploitation should have silenced him. But Flash survived it all. He transformed every adversity into fuel. The chaos of the Bronx created his resourcefulness. Foster care gave him focus and determination. And trauma became motivation. Exploitation taught him to fight for artists' rights and long-term wealth instead of temporary fame. His philosophy centers on three powers: the power of thought, the power of choice, and most importantly, the power of focus. Flash proves that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. The scars, physical or psychological, can become symbols of triumph instead of shame. That technical mastery can be a form of healing. That marginalized communities produce not just survivors, but innovators who changed the world. Grandmaster Flash turned the turntable into an instrument. He turned pain into purpose. He turned the South Bronx into the birthplace of a global culture, and he's still here, almost 70 years old, reflecting on the genre he helped create and advocating for the recognition hip-hop deserves. His story isn't just about music, it's about resilience, about taking the worst circumstances imaginable and building something beautiful. So as we wrap this up, remember Flash's journey from foster care to park jams, from violence to innovation, from exploitation to advocacy. His life is proof that adversity doesn't have to defeat you. It can define you in a different way. It can make you stronger, sharper, more determined. Flash's technical genius came from his need for control. His perfectionism came from his trauma. His creativity came from his poverty. Everything that should have destroyed him instead created him. If this story moved you, if Flash's resilience inspired you, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and most importantly, drop a comment about the pioneers in your life or your community who deserve recognition. Who are the people who turned nothing into something, who built culture from chaos? Let's celebrate them, and let's make sure the next generation knows that greatness doesn't require privilege. It requires focus, determination, and the refusal to let circumstances write your story. Grandmaster Flash proved that, in his legacy, like those scars on his neck, will never fade.